Professor Fiennes, Professor Dickinson.
Thank you very much. Fascinating talk. You were talking about what we owe to people who contribute data, and we've been talking about inequalities and different parts of the world. And would you think that once we commodify data, it should be taxed, and the benefits should accrue back to those who contributed it, or it should be used for some social purpose like primary care or some other thing? How would you think about that ethically and as a policy question?
I'm hesitating because I've thought about this a lot, not because I haven't thought about it. And the more I think about it, the less I know an answer. My first answer would have been yes, we should tax corporate data use, not individual data use, but we should tax corporate data use. I think to some extent the focus of policies on only GAFA, on only the 5 largest multinational companies is a bit of tokenism. So I think we need to think more systemically about how to bring the profits that are obtained on the basis of data that we have all helped to create as patients, as taxpayers. We need to bring some of that back into the public. Whether a data tax is the right thing to do, I still tend to say yes, and people who disagree with me, they say it's too complicated, you have to force everyone to make their data use traceable, but maybe that's a good byproduct. There are ways in which in other domains of finance and tax law, this is already happening. You don't need to make it public, you don't need to force companies to make public how they use data, but you can have people who are bound by confidentiality who look into those proprietary secrets. Yeah.
I mean, I think if it's about all of us, it should be about all of us. And I don't think it needs to be traceable back, but if somebody contributes, there may be a way. I mean, I think it's something to think about for a social justice mission. I'm sure the Pope would endorse that kind of, redistribution of wealth, which is a kind of a proxy for knowledge. Because, I mean, I think it was earlier said we need 7 billion people to get the kind of data set that's going to identify some of these correlations, and all 7 billion should probably benefit from that endeavor if we go down that path. I think it would build solidarity, and it's a communitarian approach.
But I think if you talk about individual level monetization of data, that's very dangerous. Okay, good, because worryingly this comes out of sort of emancipatory circles in Silicon Valley who think the epitome of autonomy of individuals is to have them to get paid for the individual data, which is very dangerous. Because good, but collectively, yes, I do think we need to make data use traceable, and I do think it's a technical and political challenge, but I think it can be done. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Barbara. Just to go back to this point, it's similar to the one that you're raising about whether we have models that we could use, maybe not tax models, but others. We do have models from tissue banking rather than data banking. We have, for example, the TICC model, which many people in this room will know, was developed by a group of Pseudoxanthoma elasticum parents, that is, not the patients themselves, because unfortunately the disease tends to be fatal. And that model involved use of market-based incentives, but the benefits went back into further research on TICC. A similar thing was sought by the Greenbergs in the case, again, it was a case to do with a fatal disease and the parents of the children, which actually found, unfortunately, against the parents. But what they were seeking there was not a profit or an individual benefit. And that was particularly appropriate because they had helped to raise money for further research into their children's condition. So there are, I think, different models which are already available to us in law, actually, and which come, and which come from the slightly different model of tissue donation. But the reason that is slightly different is it does involve more effort. And if we're going to look at a sort of spectrum of rights. I know you're not very keen on attributing property rights, but if we see them as communal rights, then I think it's less objectionable than if you see them as individual profit-making rights. There's a spectrum of effort and work and Lockean labor involved. That is, the traditional justification in philosophy is the mixing of one's labor with the product is what gives you rights in it. Someone who's simply given data for something they would have done anyway, had a test or whatever, that they would have had anyway, may not deserve the same level of rights as, say, the Greenberg parents or the PXE parents, where they have actually consciously sought to create a data bank and put money and effort into it. So I'm just suggesting that we do have a look at some of these other models, and we're not necessarily creating it from scratch, but we also need to be careful about the differences between those models and what I think you're looking for.
I would only endorse that, Donna, thank you. But one challenge, I think, is that the data, of course, don't have a clear material substrate, and they are multiple. They're in many places at the same time. And I'm currently aware of a couple of people who are drawing analogies, so trying to come up with new legal instruments by drawing analogy between the physical and the data body, and saying we can obtain even property rights to materials that have been separated from our physical body, and maybe in analogy we should say we can have property rights to data that was separated from our data body. But I think here's where the analogy between the data and the physical body falls short, because the physical body is bounded and the data body is not bounded. It's probably one of the essential features of a data body not to be bounded. So I think I find it very appealing. There's also a colleague of mine in Canberra who now says, well, you know, the state doesn't allow us to enslave our physical bodies. Why can we enslave our digital bodies? I find that very interesting, but I think if you really dig deep, the analogy falls short. But this doesn't detract anything from what you suggested. I just said we need to do this, we need to think it through, but it's extremely difficult.
Could I just add one thing quickly before you move on? I think the parallel is more with something, I think the parallel is more with something like an immortal cell line, something like the Lax line, Henrietta Lax line. Because once that is created, it is transferable. It can be had by anyone, as indeed is true of the Lax line. So I think, you know, yes, we need to look at the differences and be skeptical, but I think the parallels do exist, and the absolute divide between tangible and intangible property in the body is not necessarily that firm.
One comment about the tax on data. Well, some people believe that corporates should pay more taxes and others that should pay less taxes for the benefit of the economy. This is another topic of this discussion. My worry is that some corporates would embrace and will be willing to pay the tax data, and in this way buy out from the public and render data commensurate with fungible goods. And one lesson to take in short from him might be that change in copyrights law in the beginning of 20th century, when originally only authors and artists could possess copyrights to their creations. And then the law allowed abstract bodies, persons, and the American legal system recognized corporates as kind of persons, but we might think of personalized medicine might incorporate the corporates, to own copyrights. So I want to be short, but this could be the analogy, because the tax could be an easy solution, but it could be an invitation to really commercialize something we are not sure should be out there for sale.
I totally disagree with this framing. I think this is buying into some of the propaganda of the companies, because it's not either a tax or something else. We need to still think of if we agree as a society that a business model is so problematic that it should be illegal, then it should be illegal, but the remaining legal and ethical data uses, some of them we will need to, if not tax, we will need to get something back from the profits that are obtained, legitimately and ethically into the people who helped to create it. But it's not a tax or something else. I think this is very important to say. We still need to outlaw some practices that we think are illegal, and I think Facebook is pretty close to that, actually.
Now we keep time and we keep discussing later.
Just, please.
Just a very short question. You spoke about missing, Barbara, you spoke about missing bodies, but whenever you do a clinical trials, the random sample of the population is not the ideal random sample population, but it's a random sample population concerning what you have at your disposal. So anytime there are missing bodies, for example, young people, the problem is not that there are missing bodies, but the problem is that those who do the clinical trial should be aware that there are missing bodies. It's a totally different, yeah, okay.
Thank you. This is the point I wanted to make.
Okay.
So we need to ask who's missing.
Yeah.
And not argue in favor of having until everyone is represented in. Although there is something to be said in favor of population-wide databases such as they have in Denmark, and here I think there are really difficult questions about, whether opt-out or opt-in is a better solution here, just because there's something to be said for everyone to be included. But overall, this is exactly the point.